Fundamentally, East Africa's made big gains in terms of trade. We've seen the trade barriers fall very heavily. I mean, I've been looking at this now almost 13 years. Trade costs have come down by about 40% on the Northern Corridor, about 20% on the Central Corridor. And that's happened because of port reform, making ports more efficient. It's happened because of border posts. Used to take you days and days to get through. Now you can do it in minutes. I think on average, the borders that we worked out, the time's fallen by about 70, 80%. So, you know, those sort of gains, and then automation of trade processes, that's really helped. And here in Rwanda, the Rwanda single window, which brings together all the trading kind of different functions, it's reduced the time it takes to clear goods from about 11 days, I think, to now about 10 hours. These are real gains. And actually, East Africa's led the continent. So I think those gains are really needed to make something like the Continental Free Trade Area happen. Because you can have a beautiful trade agreement, but if you can't trade across a border, it doesn't mean anything to the people trying to trade. So I think the experience that we have in East Africa is really valuable. And I know the AU and UNECA that are convening today's meeting, they're really cognizant of that. So I think, you know, we in East Africa should be the trailblazers for the Continental Free Trade Area. I really do. And I think the experience we've got in learning from other parts of Africa for other parts of Africa, from us for other parts, is really critical. So no, I think we have a big role to play and actually a big responsibility in the knowledge that we've generated. But we're lucky we've had a lot of political will.
Yes, and we've seen all the good things happening here, but now for the continent to leverage female economic empowerment, you know, what challenges should be first tackled by Africa?
Well, I think first of all is to involve women in the whole process. And I think women need to be involved in all tiers of the negotiations. But I think particularly vulnerable traders, that often their voice isn't very strong at the negotiation table. So these are much poorer women who earn a living by trading or producing. You know, their voice needs to be heard much more at some of these discussions. And it's interesting today, in the analysis that was shown, is that agriculture is going to be one of the biggest gainers. So if that's one of the biggest gainers, you know, that will really needs women to be involved. And we need to really think through some of the barriers that women face, because, you know, without women, our GDP is, you know, it's really not going to grow. It's really important.
Yeah, that is very true. And what role is Trademark East Africa playing in actually paving way for women traders on the continent?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, we've learned a lot. We started working at these borders, and we noticed that a lot of the traders are women. So we began to try to understand what they were trading and the problems they face. They face problems of gender-based violence, sexual harassment. They're often charged tariffs and duties they didn't have to pay. They didn't know their rights. So I think we've done some simple things to implement the simplified trading regime, which is really all about trying to help the small traders just move through the border without a problem. So we learned and we piloted here in Rwanda. We started the work with ProFem, and we started with about 5,000 women. We're now working with 30,000. And on average, their incomes have doubled as a result of the work. We tried to link them in with sources of training, with microfinance, and also training on how to add more value to what they're selling. So, you know, that's had a lot of effect. And what I'd like to do now is to step it up from 30,000 to 300,000. And we all know that women invest more in the household than men, okay? And I think generally, if we reach 300,000 with about an average household size of 6, that's 1.8 million people. And the potential to really increase their income is very substantial. If we can raise enough funds, I'd love to raise that to 1 million, but that's where we're targeting at the moment. So we've done quite a lot. We understand quite a lot of the problems that women face at the borders, but there are other problems. Inheritance laws often mean that women can't inherit assets. There's a big problem often with access to finance. So those issues need to be looked at in tandem with the kind of work that we're doing.
Yeah, so when you say you've done your part, but now what can the governments here on the continent do in order to also pave way for these women who want to be better for themselves?
Well, I think some of the things that can be done is to gear the negotiations to really include women. I said that earlier, but that hasn't happened. And trade policy, the way that trade policy works, it can often have structural transformations that change the workforce and the demand and the work patterns So industrialization offers a huge opportunity for women workers, but also women managers and women directors. So I think, first of all, the inclusion of women in the whole process is really important. But then again, some of the simple toolkits that I mentioned earlier about how can you help women-owned businesses really thrive, particularly small businesses, that should be rolled out across the continent. And unfortunately, that's not the case at the moment. But I think we also need to look at women-owned growth enterprises. It's not just about small traders. We need to really think about how we can put more women in charge of some of these, really startups and growth companies across the continent.
Now, speaking about inclusion, earlier on I actually saw a report by Gallup International Labour Organization study, which says that if the economic gender gap is reduced by only 25%, then the global GDP could increase by $5.3 trillion. That is a very huge sum. And so as Trademark East Africa, can you just put it in figures how much the continent is losing out by not actually giving women the right policies?
Well, two statistics come to mind. The first is from McKinsey's, and they looked at the gender parity. If gender parity occurred in the workplace, what effect would that have on African GDP? And it was about 26% increase. You're talking trillions of dollars. They also, another study looked at agriculture, and if women's inclusion in agriculture raised to the sort of gender parity levels, we'd probably see about a 30% increase in output. That would probably add about 2 to 4% growth to our economies every year across the continent.
Yeah, and what role could women empowerment play in actually for the UN Sustainable Development Goals? What role can women actually play in order to eradicate?
Well, right across the board. I mean, women are involved in every facet of economic activity. So, I mean, clearly that would have a huge impact across all of the different Sustainable Development Goals. But I mean, I think mostly it would be an income-based